The first time I drove out here, I thought I'd find peace. The gravel road twisted through endless fields, fading into a fog so thick it felt like the air itself was swallowing me whole. The ranch lay beyond a line of skeletal trees, pale under the faint glow of a half-moon. A cold wind rustled the dry grass, carrying whispers that sounded almost like voices, but maybe it was only the wind. Inside the cabin, the lights flickered as if unsure they wanted to stay on. I remember the silence. Heavy, pressing, almost alive. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum thrummed beneath the earth, vibrating up through my shoes. I tried to convince myself it was just the ranch settling, the old wires, the night. But then I saw it, a shadow, tall and twisted, moving along the tree line, watching me. My stomach sank. My breath caught in my chest. And I realized I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it. Morning came slow. A gray light crept over the hills, dragging a thin mist with it. The air smelled of wet hay and old wood, cold enough to sting my fingers when I touched the fence. The ranch looked different in the fog, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the land was holding its breath. The corrals stood in a row, gates half open, chains swaying in the breeze. But every pen was empty. The troughs were still damp. The straw disturbed, as if something had been here, feeding, moving, breathing. But the animals were gone. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the soft ground. The boards creaked under my hand, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift in the mist. A flicker, between one blink and the next. It was too still after that. Only the faint scrape of metal somewhere behind the barn. Slow, uneven, like something dragging itself along the wall. I called out quietly. No answer. The scraping stopped. When I walked around the corner, the fog thickened, pale and swirling. Nothing was there. Just the tool shed, half collapsed, and a few feathers scattered in the dirt. They were wet, darkened like they'd soaked in something other than rain. The silence felt wrong. Even the wind seemed to move around me instead of through. I could hear my own breath too clearly, short, uneven. And under it, something else, a rhythm, soft, like footsteps pressed into damp soil. I turned, but the fog moved faster than my eyes could follow. It folded in on itself, long shadows slipping through it. I stepped back, and the gate behind me groaned. The chains clinked, once, twice, then went still. Everything in me said to leave, but I stayed. There was a smell now, earthy, metallic, like old rainwater left to rot in a bucket. I brushed my hand against the wood again. It was slick, cold, and I realized the boards were swaying, ever so slightly, not from the wind, from weight, as if something leaned against them from the inside. I held my breath, waited. The sway stopped. And then in that hush, I felt it, the pull, the shadows on the ground, stretched, slowly at first, then longer, too long, reaching toward me across the mud like dark fingers. They trembled when I stepped back, almost alive, almost wanting. My heart was loud in my chest, too loud for this place. The fog coiled tighter around the fences, and the world felt smaller, like the sky itself was pressing down. I whispered to myself, barely a sound, just to hear a voice, but the air caught it, pulled it away. Something rustled by the barn doors, quick, sharp, then gone. I froze, staring at the spot. Every instinct begged to look away, but I couldn't. The doors shifted, not opening, just breathing, wood bending with something behind it. Then silence again, a hollow silence that felt alive. The light changed, or maybe the fog thickened. It's hard to tell in that kind of half-dark. I could see my reflection faintly in the window glass, pale, blurred. And something else behind it, just movement. Just a trick of the fog, I told myself. But it lingered when I didn't blink. I stepped back until I could feel the chill of the air against my neck. The fields beyond the corrals were empty, endless white haze. No birds, no cattle, no sign that life had ever touched this place. The wind picked up again, soft but deep, a hollow rush through the fences. It carried a sound I didn't want to name, almost like breathing, almost like mine. For a moment, I thought I saw footprints forming in the dirt, fresh, heavy. But when I looked down, the mud was smooth, untouched. The scraping began again. Farther this time. Behind the barn. I didn't follow it. I just stood there, hands trembling against the post, feeling the faint vibration through the wood. Something out there was moving, watching, waiting for me to take one more step. But I didn't. The fog began to lift. Only slightly. The fences came back into view, broken lines across a gray field. Empty still. The air was colder now, the kind of cold that stays under your skin. And when I finally turned to leave, I could swear I heard the gate swing open behind me, slowly, chains dragging in the dirt, soft, steady, as if the corrals weren't empty anymore. The fog hadn't lifted by afternoon. It drifted higher, thinning only enough to show the dark edges of the forest. The pines stood like tall sentinels, silent, watching. I walked toward them anyway. The air was colder here, sharp with the scent of sap and wet bark. Each step pressed into soft needles, muffled, as though the forest swallowed the sound. Even the wind moved quietly between the trees. For a long while, I thought I was alone. Then I heard it. Faint, carried low through the branches, a whisper, soft enough to be mistaken for breeze, but too deliberate, too human. It slipped around me, curling through the mist. I stopped, and it stopped too. Only the faint creak of trees shifting in the cold. Then, nothing. When I moved again, it followed. Not words exactly, more like a breath trying to become one. I turned in circles, searching. Every direction looked the same, pale trunks fading into fog. I told myself it was the wind. But the forest didn't sound like that. This was slower, measured, almost curious. The trees began to sway. Not all of them, only those near me. Branches bending slightly toward the center, as though something unseen brushed past them. I felt it too. A faint rush of air along my sleeve. Cold enough to raise goosebumps. The whispers came again, closer this time. Low and rhythmic. I couldn't make out a single word, but my name felt buried in it. Like an echo I almost recognized. I knelt, pressed my hand to the soil. It trembled faintly beneath my palm. The ground was breathing, slowly, shallow. I rose quickly. The forest went still again. Every pine stood straight, quiet, as if nothing had moved at all. Even the fog seemed to hesitate. Then came the scent, faint, metallic, like rain striking old iron. I followed it deeper, until the trees grew denser. The air there was thick, muffled. Even my footsteps felt heavy, like walking through memory. Something brushed my shoulder. A branch, I thought. But when I looked back, nothing was close enough to touch me. Only a hollow space where the fog moved differently. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice barely carried. Still, the forest answered. A single word stretched thin through the wind, not clear, but shaped like speech. It came from the right, then behind me, then everywhere. Circling. Soft. Patient. I could feel it. Whatever it was, keeping distance. Close enough to see me, but never enough for me to see it. The kind of presence that made the hair rise at the back of the neck. A pine cone dropped suddenly, cracking against a root. The sound was sharp, startling in the quiet. Then another fell. And another. I looked up. The branches above were still. Perfectly still. The whispers thickened. They weren't voices anymore, just a hum of breath, like the forest was alive and exhaling around me. The trees swayed in rhythm with it, slow, deliberate, as if listening. My throat went dry. I took one step back. The hum softened instantly, retreating into the wind. Another step, and it vanished altogether. Only silence now, that hollow, endless silence that feels too wide for sound to fill. The fog shifted between the trunks like pale smoke, and for a heartbeat, I saw something move within it. A shape, tall, still, watching. But when I blinked, the fog swallowed it whole, and the forest stood empty again. The ground beneath me gave a soft creak, like something old turning in its sleep. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned back toward the ranch, tracing the faint path I'd left. Each step felt heavier, each breath shallower. Behind me, the pines seemed to lean inward, closing their ranks. Just before the clearing, the whisper came once more. Faint, gentle, almost kind. I stopped, listened. The wind brushed my ear like a hand. A single syllable drifted through, stretched thin, like it came from far below the roots. I couldn't understand it, but it sounded relieved, then silence again. Complete, as though the forest had gone to sleep. When I reached the edge, I looked back. The fog sat thick among the trunks, unmoving. The trees no longer swayed. No whisper followed, only the faint scent of pine and cold earth lingering on my clothes, and the quiet certainty that the forest now knew my name. Night settled heavy over the ranch. The fog hadn't gone. It just turned darker, thicker, like a living thing pressed against the windows. Inside the cabin, I lit the old lantern. Its glass was cracked, its frame rusted, but it held a steady flame. For a while, the room glowed with a soft, uneven light. Dust drifted through it, turning the air into a haze of gold and shadow. I sat near the wall, listening to the faint creak of the rafters above. The silence felt brittle, like one sound too loud might break it. The lantern flickered once, then again. A slow pulse, as if breathing. I leaned closer, adjusting the knob. The flame steadied for a moment, then danced wildly, throwing long shapes against the walls. Shapes that didn't belong to me. I watched them. 4, maybe 5 dark outlines moving where nothing moved. One stretched across the floor, long and bending, sliding like smoke toward the corner. My breath caught. I whispered to myself that it was only the flame. Only shadows, but the lantern burned steady again, and the shapes didn't fade. They lingered, twisting softly, their edges shifting in ways light shouldn't move. A faint hum filled the air, low like something electric far away. The glass of the lantern trembled beneath my fingers, and that's when I felt it. A brush. Soft. Across my arm, I froze. The touch was cold, lighter than a moth's wing, but human enough to know it wasn't imagined. I turned slowly, but nothing stood behind me. Only the wall. The shadows kept moving, circling me now, overlapping one another until the light itself seemed to darken. The hum deepened, almost melodic. I could feel it in my chest. Then, the lantern dimmed. Once. Twice. And with the third flicker, the flame snapped out. Darkness rushed in fast, swallowing every shape, every line of the room. Only the faint smell of burnt oil lingered. I stayed still, too afraid to move. The darkness pressed close. Thick, heavy, alive. My hand found the lantern again, fingers trembling as they searched for the knob. Something shifted near the door. A faint scrape like nails brushing wood. Then another. Slow, deliberate, I whispered. "Hello?" The word barely left my lips before something exhaled beside me, close enough that I felt the air move against my cheek. I reached for the matches, fumbled, dropped them. A faint sound, like a footstep, came from the other side of the room. Then another, closer. The air smelled strange now. Damp, metallic, like soil after rain, mixed with something sour. I struck a match. For half a second, light filled the space, thin and trembling. No one was there. But the shadows on the wall still moved. Even without flame, they shouldn't have been there. But they were. And one of them was mine. Only it wasn't. It stood still when I moved. Turned its head when I didn't. And smiled. The match burned to my fingers. I dropped it. Darkness again. My heart thudded too loudly in the silence. Somewhere near the corner, a soft tap began. Like a fingernail against glass. Once, twice, then gone. I forced myself to breathe. Slow, shallow. Reached again for the lantern. When I touched it, the metal was warm. Too warm. Like it had been held by someone else. I whispered, "Please," though I didn't know what I was asking for. The hum returned. Quieter now, more like a whisper. It moved through the air, circling me, brushing against my ears, my hair, my breath. I felt it shape itself into something almost spoken. It didn't say my name, but it felt like it wanted to. The lantern flared suddenly, a weak, trembling glow, just enough to paint the walls again. Everything looked normal. The floor, the table, the windows streaked with fog. Except for one thing. Fingerprints, clear and wet on the inside of the glass. I stared at them until the flame began to steady. 5 small smudges, perfectly shaped, pressed from within. The glass was cool to the touch. A faint draft passed through the room. No open window, no visible source. It brushed my neck, my hair, then silence again. I turned the lantern down, watching the flame shrink into a dull ember. For a moment, I thought I saw movement beyond the glass, a faint outline, like someone sitting across from me in the dark. But when I blinked, it was gone. The light dimmed one last time, and I was left with the hollow echo of my own breathing. Outside, the fog pressed harder against the windows. The pines whispered again far in the distance, and inside, the lantern flickered just once more, as if something unseen had leaned close and breathed it out. The night was colder than before. The air carried a weight, the kind that settles on your chest and won't lift. I sat near the lantern's faint glow, wrapped in a blanket that didn't seem to hold any warmth. Outside, the fog drifted slow against the cabin walls. It made soft, wet sounds like breath sliding across glass. The pines were nothing but silhouettes now, leaning in from the darkness. That's when I heard it, a soft tap, light, barely there. From above, at first I thought it was pine cones, maybe the branches swaying. But the sound came again, heavier this time. Tap, pause, tap, each one measured, deliberate, moving slowly from one side of the roof to the other. I held my breath and listened. The lantern flame trembled, thin and nervous. It almost matched the rhythm of the steps above me. Tap, tap. Then silence, the kind of silence that swells in the chest, like the air waiting for something else to happen. I stood, careful not to make a sound. The wooden floor creaked anyway. The next step came right after, heavier now. Almost answering me, I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. There was no wind, no rain, only that sound. Too slow for an animal, too deliberate for a branch, something was walking. I grabbed the lantern and opened the cabin door. The fog met me instantly, curling inside like smoke. I stepped out into the cold, the light barely reaching the edge of the porch. The roof above was hidden, but the sound hadn't stopped. Now it moved faster, crossing from one end of the cabin to the other. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then another step right above where I stood. I looked up, the breath freezing in my throat. Nothing. Just gray sky, thick fog, and the faint outline of the chimney. The steps continued. Moving away again, slow, heavy, deliberate. I climbed the ladder, leaning against the side of the cabin, the metal cold against my hands. Halfway up, the sound stopped. The silence was worse. It wrapped around me like something solid. When I reached the top, my heart stuttered. The roof was empty, no prints. No movement, only dust, thick and untouched. Until I saw it, a single mark, not deep, but fresh. The print was larger than my boot, wider, heavier. The edges sunk into the dirt just enough to leave shape. 5 long impressions, not like toes, not like claws. Something in between. I stared at it until the lantern flickered. When I blinked, there were more. A line of them, stretching toward the far edge of the roof. They stopped halfway, abruptly, as if whatever made them had vanished mid-step. A soft sound came from behind me then. A creak, like wood bending under weight. I turned fast, holding the lantern high. No one there. But the dust rippled. A faint shift, circular, as if something invisible had just moved through it. The air grew colder. The fog above the roof began to swirl, lowering itself in thin, ghostly threads. I could feel it brushing against my face, cool and damp, almost whispering. I stepped back, one foot sliding slightly in the dust. That's when I noticed my own footprints beside the others. Only mine looked older now, softened, blurred, as though I'd been standing there for hours. The roof creaked again, louder this time. Then the tapping returned, and behind me just a few feet away, I turned, but there was only fog. Tap, tap. The sound circled me, always out of sight, always one step ahead. I backed toward the ladder, gripping the lantern so tight my knuckles ached. The light wavered, throwing thin gold across the roof, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow bend. Not rise, not fall, but bend, like smoke curling away from heat. Then it was gone. The tapping stopped as soon as my foot hit the ground. No sound from above, only the faint drip of dew from the eaves and the soft rustle of the fog rolling through the grass. I looked up one last time. The roof was silent again, still, but in the dust, those prints remained, fresh, oversized, and facing the edge where nothing should stand. When I turned back toward the door, I caught a glimpse of movement in the window's reflection. Something shifting where I had just been. A shadow that didn't move like fog. Then it was gone. The tapping never came again that night. But sometimes, when the wind passes over the cabin, I swear I can hear it. Faint, measured, moving slowly across the roof, looking for a place to stop. The fog thickened again that night. It pressed close to the cabin, curling against the glass like it wanted to come in. The world outside was gone, just pale gray, breathing softly against the windows. I sat near the lantern, its light dim and trembling. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and cold metal. Every sound felt distant, swallowed before it reached the walls. For a while, I thought I was alone. Then I looked up. Through the cracked window, something glimmered. Two small, pale reflections hovering just above the sill. Still. Unblinking. At first, I thought they were stars. The fog sometimes played tricks like that. But these didn't flicker. And they were too close. Eyes. They caught the lantern's light and held it. Dull, almost colorless. Like glass marbles fogged by breath. I leaned forward, careful not to make a sound. The eyes didn't move. Didn't blink, they just watched. My breath fogged the inside of the window, and for a moment I lost sight of them. When I wiped the glass clear, they were gone. The space beyond was empty. Only the pale fog shifting slowly across the yard. I waited, heartbeat slow but heavy. Nothing. I sat back, telling myself it was reflection, light bending through mist, maybe my own shadow. But the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. The air changed, colder, still. The lantern's flame drew thin, bending toward the window as though pulled by a breath from outside. A faint tap came then. Barely audible. Just once against the glass, I froze. The eyes were back. Closer now. Pressed against the crack, catching the dim gold of the lantern, they looked wet. Not glowing, not human, just wet. Like something standing too close, too still. I wanted to move, to reach for the curtain. But the weight of being watched held me in place. A hollow ache crept up my spine, the kind you feel when you know you're not alone. Then, as I blinked, they vanished again, gone so completely that the fog outside looked untouched. I waited. 1 breath, 2, 3, and then the tapping returned. Softer. From a different window. Behind me. The sound was careful, patient, almost polite. I turned slowly, every muscle tight. The back window shimmered faintly, same pale reflections, faintly higher this time. And for a heartbeat, I could see what framed them. Not a face, not even a body, just darkness, thick and oddly shaped as if the fog itself had formed eyes and leaned in close. The lantern flickered again. I stepped toward the window without meaning to, drawn by something between fear and curiosity. Each step creaked the floor, breaking the silence like small cracks in glass. The eyes didn't move. They waited, patient. I reached for the curtain. Fingers trembling, I pulled it closed. The cloth brushed my hand, cold and damp like it had been touched from the other side. The room dimmed, quiet again, but the feeling stayed. That pressure, that invisible weight of being watched from just beyond the wall. A whisper of movement brushed across the roof then, faint but deliberate. Not footsteps, not the wind, just the shift of weight, careful and slow. I didn't look up. Instead, I sat back down, keeping my eyes on the floor. The lantern's flame stilled, standing tall and thin in the quiet air. Everything seemed normal again, until I noticed my reflection in the glass of the lantern. Behind me, faint, blurred by light, two small, pale orbs floated near the door, motionless. I turned quickly. Nothing there, only the open dark of the cabin and the sound of my own breath. I walked to the door, half expecting it to move. The wood was cool beneath my fingers, and through the thin gap I could hear the fog outside whispering. No tapping now. No eyes. I opened it just a little, enough to see the porch. The fog rolled past like slow water, and in the mud below the steps, two impressions, small, round, perfectly spaced, as if something had stood there, waiting, watching through the window all along. The cold settled deeper in my chest. I closed the door, slid the latch, and sat back near the fading lantern. Sleep never came. I just waited for dawn. But even as the light began to creep through the cracks, I didn't look at the windows again, because I knew if I did, those eyes would still be there, waiting for me to notice. The night stretched endless. The fog still clung to the earth, pale and low, drifting like breath over the grass. The world felt smaller somehow, muffled beneath that weight of gray. Every sound dulled. Every shadow lingered too long. I stepped outside, wrapped in my coat, the lantern faint in my hand. The air smelled of damp wood and iron. Even the pines stood still, their tips swallowed by mist. Nothing moved. Until it did. A sound, deep and far away, rising from the edge of the forest. A howl, long, drawn out. It carried through the fog, curling around the barn, slipping beneath the cabin door behind me. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. Too steady, too full, almost like a voice stretched thin by distance. The cattle pens were still empty. Their gates swayed slightly, though no wind touched them. I held the lantern higher. Its glow seemed to shrink against the darkness, swallowed before it could reach the trees. Another howl came. Closer now. The sound rolled across the ground, vibrating through my boots. Then silence, deep and hollow, the kind that makes you aware of your heartbeat. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Every small thing in the night seemed to pause, listening. I turned toward the tree line, squinting through the fog. Shapes moved between the trunks, tall, slow, and heavy. But the light wouldn't touch them. It stopped short, as if the dark itself refused to let me see. A sudden shift in the distance, something large brushing against the brush. Branches snapped. The fog rippled. And then another howl. This one was nearer, lower. It didn't echo. It sank, folding into the ground until it was more felt than heard. My fingers tightened around the lantern handle. The metal was slick with cold sweat. Behind me, the barn creaked, slow, dragging, as though something moved inside. I turned, my chest heavy with breath I hadn't taken. The doors swayed slightly, just enough to let a thin thread of darkness spill out between them. The smell that came with it was faint. Wet earth, fur, and something faintly sweet, like rot turned soft. The lantern flickered once. Then again. The light dimmed to a pulse. Somewhere near the fence line, something shifted the ground. The mud pressed inward, heavy steps forming fresh prints that led toward the trees. But nothing made them. They appeared one by one, slow and deliberate, as though invisible feet walked through the fog. I backed toward the porch, never taking my eyes from the prints. The fog thickened there, swirling around the fence posts, wrapping them in thin white coils. And then I saw it, a shape at the edge of the trees, tall, still. Its outline blurred by the mist, but its eyes caught the lantern light for just a second. Two faint glimmers far apart fixed on me. I couldn't move. The air around me went still. Even the fog froze mid-drift, like time had held its breath. The creature, or whatever it was, tilted its head slowly, the motion soft but wrong, too fluid. Then another howl broke the silence. Not far, not distant. This one came from somewhere behind me. I turned sharply, lantern swinging wide. The light cut through the mist, but there was nothing there. Just the empty pens, the cracked earth, the endless gray. When I looked back, the shape by the trees was gone. Only fog, only stillness. The air felt heavier now, close enough to touch. My breath came in small, clouded bursts. I could still hear the echo of the howl, though it had stopped minutes ago, a faint vibration that lived in my bones. Something brushed the side of the cabin. Once. Wood moaned, dry and low. Then came a scraping sound, moving along the wall toward the porch. I stepped back, nearly dropping the lantern. It flickered weakly, fighting the dark. The scraping paused. Then, nothing. Only the slow drip of condensation from the eaves. Only the fog curling thicker around my ankles. I listened, long enough for silence to settle again. And then faint, far in the distance. The howl returned. Long, drawn out, lonely. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a call. Something in it sounded broken, human almost. Like someone calling home through a throat full of air and sorrow. I stood there until it faded completely, swallowed by the fog and night. The ranch stayed still, but the quiet that followed didn't feel safe. It felt expectant, as though something out there had noticed me and would remember where I was. The fog finally broke by morning, but the quiet didn't. It clung to the air, thick as sleep, refusing to lift. The world looked pale, sky the color of old paper, earth soaked in shadow. Even the light felt tired. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That sound under the floorboards. Faint, slow, almost rhythmic. At first I thought it was water or wind trapped beneath the cabin, but the longer I listened, the more it sounded like breathing. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Old wood shifting, maybe small animals moving through the crawl space. But the noise had weight. It wasn't the kind of sound that scurries. It lingered. Waited. When I pressed my ear to the floor, the boards were cold. Colder than the air. And beneath them, the noise paused. Then shifted. A whisper. Soft. Too soft to understand. But close enough that it brushed the edge of hearing. Like someone speaking through a wall made of fog and dust. I pushed back, heart pressing against my ribs. The sound didn't follow, but it didn't stop either. Just a low murmur, constant and strange, like a river of voices flowing underground. By noon, the wind picked up. The fog tore apart in thin ribbons, revealing the distant hills for the first time in days. They looked empty, colorless, but somehow alive, as if the land itself had been waiting. I stepped outside for air, half expecting to see movement between the trees. Nothing. Only the soft hiss of wind through dry grass. But when I came back inside, the whispering was louder. It came in waves now, rising and falling, sometimes a hiss, sometimes almost words. I crouched by the old trapdoor near the hearth, one I'd never noticed before. It was small, square, the wood darker than the rest of the floor. No lock, just a handle. The whispers pulsed softly from beneath it, like breath behind a door. I hesitated, then lifted the latch. The sound stopped. I froze, listening. Nothing. Only the faint creak of the cabin settling, then, as I leaned closer, a sudden burst of cold air swept out from the gap. It smelled faintly of earth and something older. Damp stone, maybe metal. The kind of scent you only find in places long closed. I held the lantern over the opening. The flame trembled, but stayed lit. Below was a narrow crawl space, maybe 3 feet high, filled with packed dirt and black roots hanging like hair from the beams, and in the center of that darkness, something glimmered. Faint, like wet glass catching a trace of light. I lowered the lantern a little more. The reflection moved. Not light, eyes. 2 of them, set low, far back, watching me. I dropped the door shut. The sound that followed was small, just a scrape, a slow drag of something heavy against wood. Then the whispering started again. Not from beneath now, from the walls. It spread slowly, circling the room. Words I couldn't make out, overlapping, whispering over each other, like dozens of voices murmuring the same thought in different tongues. I backed toward the door, lantern shaking in my hand. The light stuttered, throwing thin shadows that bent wrong across the floor. The whispers rose, not louder, just closer. Right behind the walls, right behind me. Then, silence, complete. Sudden, the air stilled. I could hear my pulse again. I turned slowly toward the hearth. The trap door was open, only an inch or two, just enough to show the darkness breathing beneath. A draft slipped through, cold and sharp, carrying the faintest sound. A single word, stretched thin and trembling. Stay. The whisper was so soft it barely broke the air, but I heard it. Every syllable. It wasn't asking. It was remembering. I slammed the door shut and shoved a chair over it. The wood creaked but held. I didn't move for a long time. Evening came without light. The sun bled out behind the ridge, and the cabin sank back into shadow. The fog began to return, sliding against the windows like slow hands. The whispering didn't start again that night, but as I sat near the lantern, I could hear something beneath the floor. Faint, steady. Not words, not breathing. Just a quiet, patient scratching, like something tracing lines in the dirt below, waiting for me to listen again. The air was heavy that evening, thick with the scent of soil and husk. The cornfield behind the barn stretched wide, a sea of gold fading into gray fog. The wind had died hours ago, but the stalks still moved, softly, like they were breathing. I stood at the edge, my lantern trembling in my hand. Each step forward made the ground sigh beneath my boots. The silence pressed in, thick, pulsing, alive. Then came the rustle. Not from me, not from the wind. Deeper inside the rows. It moved fast, a ripple cutting through the stalks, bending them in one direction, then another. Like something tall was walking between them. Something that didn't care to hide. I called out once. My voice didn't go far. It sank into the corn and vanished. The rustling stopped. Only the stillness remained. Even the crickets had gone silent. The fog drifted lower, curling between the rows, touching the tips of the corn with pale fingers. I could smell damp earth and something faintly metallic, like blood dried on old iron. I tightened my grip on the lantern. The flame flickered once, as if pulled. When I took another step forward, a whisper followed. Not words, just a sound, a breath dragging across the stalks. The rustling began again, faster now, circling me. Rows shifting, snapping softly as if brushed by long arms. The lantern light quivered, stretching shadows across the corn like claws. I tried to follow the motion with my eyes, but it was everywhere. In front, behind, too quick. And then I saw it. Between the rows, a shape, tall, bent. Its limbs wrong, too long to belong to anything human. It stood perfectly still, the fog gathering around its frame, making its outline shimmer. I blinked, and it was gone. Only the corn swayed where it had been. A gust of cold air rushed past, bending the stalks toward me. Something brushed my arm, light, like a leaf. But it was heavier than that, softer, almost deliberate. I stepped back, heart hammering. The lantern flickered again, casting long lines of gold through the fog. In that brief light, I saw something move, far down the row, a head rising slowly above the corn. It wasn't shaped right. Too smooth, too narrow, and the way it tilted, as if trying to understand what I was. I froze. The fog shifted. The head was gone, but the rustling started once more, this time rushing toward me. Stalks cracked open in its path, and before I could move, the light dimmed, swallowed by the gray. Something brushed past my leg, cold, wet. I stumbled back out of the row, gasping. The open field behind me felt safer, but when I turned, the corn was still swaying. No wind, just motion. Slow and steady, like it was breathing again. I waited. Minutes passed. The fog thinned, revealing faint lines of moonlight. The field was calm now, still. Then from somewhere deep within, a single stalk snapped, loud, sharp, followed by another, and another, like footsteps receding deeper into the corn. I raised the lantern, trying to follow with my eyes. But the light only reached so far. Beyond it, the rows faded into black, then a whisper, a real one this time. Low, almost a voice. It came from the dark rows, soft and cracked, repeating the same sound over and over. Not words, just a hum, pitched too low to be human, like the echo of a voice learning how to speak. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was dry. my chest too tight. The humming grew fainter, swallowed by distance, until only the rustle of corn remained. Slow, gentle, almost peaceful again. I turned back toward the barn, the lantern light swaying across the dirt. Every few steps I looked over my shoulder. Nothing followed. Nothing moved. But when I reached the door, I noticed something on the ground near the threshold. A line of dirt disturbed, shallow winding toward the cornfield. And pressed into it, a print long, narrow, with too many toes. The edges were still damp, fresh. I stepped back slowly, watching the fog drift between the rows once more. The corn swayed again, just slightly, and from somewhere unseen, a soft rustle answered my breath, like it was waiting for me to step closer. I didn't. I closed the barn door and slid the bolt. The sound stopped almost instantly. Silence filled the air again. Too full, too deep. And as I set the lantern down, I realized the smell of damp earth hadn't faded. It had followed me inside, settled into the wood, into the air, like something had brushed past the door before it closed, and stayed. The night was colder than it should have been. Even with the fire still burning, the air in the cabin carried a damp chill. The fog had thickened outside, pale, pressing, almost liquid. I could hear it whispering against the walls. I sat by the window, watching the dark. Everything beyond the glass looked still, too still. Then the door moved, just slightly. A soft creak, like wood stretching after sleep. It shouldn't have. I had bolted it. The sound came again, low, long, tired. The cabin door was opening. Slowly, the hinges moaned in protest, and the cold air rushed in. It carried the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic. I rose, every step cautious, my heartbeat too loud. The firelight flickered as if something passed between it and me. Shadows lengthened along the walls, reaching across the floor. And there, in the pale light, were footprints. Mud, smeared in half circles, leading from the door into the room. They looped once, twice, me, and stopped in the center. No sound followed. No breath, no movement. Just the slow, steady hiss of the fog curling through the open door. I bent closer to the prints. They weren't boots. They weren't paws either. Each one was uneven, long, like something dragged its weight while walking. I could see faint streaks between them, as if whatever made them crawled sometimes, not walked. The air trembled with quiet. I turned toward the door again. It stood open, swaying slightly, the night breathing through the gap. Hello? The word left me before I could stop it. It sounded small. Wrong. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to silence. The reply came softly. Not a word and a drag, like a hand pulling across the floorboards. Slow, deliberate. Behind me. I spun, lantern raised. The prints were still there, glistening faintly. And just beyond them, a new one forming. The dirt stirred, pressed down, as if by something invisible placing its weight carefully into the floor. Then another. And another. Moving in a slow circle, my breath caught. The air itself felt thick, vibrating with something unseen. I backed toward the door, my boots scraping against the boards. The flame wavered, stretching the shadows high against the walls. For a moment I thought I saw movement in them, a shape bending near the ceiling, long and curved, like smoke caught in wind. The door groaned again. It didn't close. It waited. The cold deepened. My skin prickled. And from somewhere near the hearth came a faint sound, tapping, as if fingernails brushing wood. It grew steadier, dragging, circling once more. Then it stopped. A full pause. The fire popped. The lantern hissed. And in the stillness, a soft whisper rose from nowhere. Stay. The word trembled through the room. Not loud, not angry. Almost tender, but it wasn't my voice. The fog pushed further inside, curling low around my feet. The air smelled of wet hay and cold ash. The prints were fading now, dissolving into the floor. The mud sinking as if it had never been. I reached for the door handle. It was slick, damp. The wood felt warm, like something had been holding it just before me. Outside, the fog swallowed the yard completely. No stars, no shapes, Only the faint rhythm of the wind brushing through the pines. Behind me, a floorboard shifted. Soft. Too close. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I stepped outside instead, the lantern light catching the mist. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something reflected in the glass. A pale outline standing in the doorway I'd just left. Tall. Still. Watching. Then the lantern flickered. And it was gone. The cabin door groaned again, this time closing slowly on its own. The sound stretched across the night, long and hollow, until it clicked shut. The echo stayed long after the latch fell silent. A hollow sound pressed into the fog, like something whispering, still turning circles in the dark. It began after midnight. A faint vibration in the walls, low, constant, steady as a heartbeat. At first I thought it was the wind again. The fog outside had fallen completely still. The air felt thick, heavy enough to hold sound in place. Even the crickets were quiet. Only that soft hum lingered, deep and slow, pulsing through the cabin like a breath too long held. I sat up in bed. The flame in the lantern hadn't moved, but its light seemed weaker, dimmer. Shadows bled at the edges of the walls, shifting gently with each vibration. The sound wasn't in one place. It moved, through the boards, the floor, the air. As if the whole cabin was breathing, I whispered to myself, just to hear something human. My own voice came out strange, swallowed by the sound before it reached the door. The hum deepened, not louder, heavier. It carried a rhythm now, a pattern, almost like a lullaby. The kind that sinks into the skin before you realize it. Soft, repetitive, hypnotic. Every object in the room began to tremble in time. The glass jar on the table shivered, tiny ripples forming in the water inside. The window latch quivered. The boards under the rug gave off a faint creak. One, then two, then silence. I held the lantern up. Its light flickered once, then steadied again, as if it too was listening. The hum shifted pitch. It was coming from beneath the floor now, humming up through the beams and into my feet. It crawled up through the chair legs into my hands until I could feel it in my chest. A soft, steady vibration behind my ribs. I stood slowly. The room tilted just slightly, like gravity had turned uncertain. The fire in the hearth had burned down to pale coals. They glowed faintly each time the sound pulsed. I stepped closer and realized something impossible. The coals were moving, not flickering, moving. Tiny bursts of ash leapt with each hum, shifting toward the center of the fireplace, gathering, forming a faint, circular shape, the same rhythm, the same pattern. It looked like something was tracing symbols into the ashes, slowly, deliberately, keeping perfect time with the sound. I took a step back. My heels struck the floorboard and the hum stopped. Silence fell like a held breath, too sudden, too deep. The air no longer vibrated. The jar was still. The coals froze in place, and in that silence, a soft tapping began, somewhere near the far wall. 3 short taps, then 2 long. Then the hum started again, fainter this time, answering the taps, as if they were speaking. My mouth was dry. I whispered again, "Who's there?" though I didn't expect an answer. What came instead was a new note beneath the hum, a lower one, almost a voice. The words were buried in vibration, impossible to understand, but I could feel them. Each one pressed against the air, shaping it, bending it around the walls. I backed toward the door. The knob was cold under my hand. When I turned it, the humming stopped again. No echo, no breath, just silence so deep it rang in my ears. Then something shifted behind me. The chair I'd been sitting on moved, only an inch, enough for one leg to scrape lightly across the floor. I turned slowly. The lantern dimmed again, its flame bending sideways, drawn toward the fireplace. The hum began once more, softer, almost gentle now, like it wanted me to listen. Objects around the room swayed in rhythm, the lantern's chain, the loose curtain, the corner of a rug lifting with each pulse. Everything breathing together. My reflection in the window seemed to blur, vibrating faintly with the hum. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw another shape standing beside it, taller, darker, humming back. The sound deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, shaking the walls. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence flooded in again, thick and complete. The coals in the fireplace went dark. The lantern's light steadied. The air felt lighter, emptier. I waited, listened. Nothing. When I finally lay back down, the boards beneath me were still warm, as if the sound had never really left, just buried itself under the floor, waiting. And just before I drifted off, I thought I heard it once more, faint, soft, patient. A hum too quiet to wake me, but steady enough to keep me from sleeping. The fog hadn't lifted for days. It clung to everything, the barn roof, the dead fences, even the air I breathed. By dusk, the world had turned the color of ash, and from the ridge beyond the ranch, I saw it. A figure, still, tall, outlined against the thinning light. At first I thought it was a tree, some dead pine that had survived the years of rot and rain. But the trees never stood like that, never so perfectly still, never facing me. The distance between us was wide, maybe half a mile of open field, yet somehow it felt closer. The fog bent around it, curling inward as if pulled toward its shape. The air grew colder. I raised my lantern. The light barely reached a few feet ahead, swallowed by the mist. But I didn't need to see clearly to know. Something up there was watching. The ridge had always made me uneasy. Too quiet, too bare. Even the crows avoided it, and yet tonight I couldn't look away. The figure never moved. It just stood, its edges blurred by fog, the outline shifting like smoke. Every time I blinked, it seemed closer, only by inches, but closer. I stepped off the porch, boots sinking into damp soil. The fog thickened around my ankles, coiling like cold breath. Each step felt heavier, slower, as if the air itself didn't want me to move forward. By the time I reached the lower field, I could no longer see the barn behind me. Only that faint glow of the lantern in my hand, and the shadow waiting above. It hadn't moved. Not once. But the way the fog bent around it, it looked almost as if it was breathing. Drawing the mist inward, releasing it again. Slow, steady. When I reached the base of the ridge, the air felt different, thinner. The hum of insects had vanished. Only the faint hiss of the fog remained, sliding through the grass like whispers beneath the ground. I took another step, then stopped. The figure shifted. Just slightly, enough for the light to catch along its outline. It wasn't fog, and it wasn't solid either. Something in between, I whispered, not to call out, but to hear how the air responded. My voice came back wrong, flattened, distorted. Like the fog had swallowed it and returned something else instead. Who's there? Nothing. Only that hollow silence. Then movement, a slow turn of its head, toward me. The fog twisted tighter around the shape, curling upward in thin spirals, like smoke pulled into lungs. And for one long breath, the lantern light flickered enough for me to see more. It wasn't standing on the ridge. It was above it, suspended. Like its feet didn't belong to the ground at all. The realization hit too slow. I took a step back. The lantern trembled in my hand. The fog below the ridge began to move, rolling downhill, crawling toward me. Inside it, faint outlines. Not one, several. Moving wrong, their shadows bending in every direction but down. I turned to run, but the air was too thick. Each breath felt heavy, dragging me down. The hum began again. The same one I'd heard nights before. Low, vibrating through the ground, through my chest, through the fog itself. It felt like the whole ridge was alive, breathing in rhythm with that sound. I stumbled back until the lantern slipped from my hand. It hit the ground, the glass shattering with a soft pop. Flames spilled into the mist, sputtered, and died. Darkness swallowed everything, and then stillness. Utter stillness, the kind that hums inside your ears when the world forgets how to make sound. I stood there, frozen, my eyes adjusted, catching the faint silver glow of the moon behind the fog. And there, at the top of the ridge, the shadow remained. But it wasn't alone anymore. Dozens of smaller shapes now stood behind it, unmoving, blended with the mist. Their forms faint, like outlines sketched in ash. They faced me, all of them. The cold deepened. My breath came out white, drifting upward, toward the ridge. Toward them, and for a heartbeat the fog bent downward, folding around my face like hands. I saw nothing but pale gray, heard nothing but a soft whisper, a voice, distant and calm. Go back. When I opened my eyes again, the ridge was empty. The fog had thinned. No figures, no shapes, only the empty hill and the silence that followed. I turned back toward the cabin. The light from the window shimmered faintly through the fog, warm and small. But when I looked down at the ground beneath my boots, there were no footprints behind me, only a faint depression in the earth, leading the opposite way. As if something else had walked the same path, right beside me. It was morning again, though the light barely reached the ranch. The fog was thick, pale, unmoving, like the world hadn't decided to wake up yet. Behind the barn, I found something I hadn't seen before. A well, old, hidden under tangled weeds and half-buried rope. The stones were cracked, darkened by moss. It looked forgotten, swallowed by time. The wind didn't reach this part of the yard. Everything here felt heavier, still, like sound itself didn't want to exist. I brushed the vines aside and leaned closer. The rope that hung down into the darkness swayed slightly, though the air was still. A wooden bucket rested near the edge, rotten through, its handle split. The smell rising from below was faint, damp, metallic, like rain on rust. When I dropped a pebble inside, I never heard it hit bottom. Only a hollow echo that seemed to breathe back at me. Something about that silence made my skin crawl. It wasn't empty. It was listening. I stepped back, staring into the pit. The fog above it bent inward, as if drawn down. Almost pulled, I thought I saw movement then, deep below. Not clear, just a shadow brushing against darker shadows. It rippled like water, but there was no sound, no reflection, no splash. I whispered, "Is someone there?" The question slipped away before it even left my mouth, but something stirred again. A faint ripple of air, then stillness. The rope twitched. Once, twice, slow, deliberate, it shouldn't have. There was no wind, no weight. Yet it moved like something below was holding the end, pulling just enough to be seen. My hands felt numb as I touched the stone rim. Cold soaked into my fingers, the kind that feels older than ice. The rope was damp, sticky almost. I pulled it slightly and it resisted, then let go. The sudden slack made me stumble back. The rope swung wildly for a moment, then stilled again. I waited, breath held. The silence below stretched long. Too long, and then a sound. Soft, wet, a single drop, falling from nowhere, echoing down and down until it faded into nothing. I stepped closer again, peering into the dark. The air that rose from it carried a faint hum, like a voice trying to find a note. Low, almost kind, almost. The reflection of the sky trembled on the surface far below. But as I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't the sky. It was something else, something moving beneath the surface. The light shifted, faint and pale, and in it, I saw my own reflection looking back. Except the eyes weren't mine. They were wider, empty, glowing faintly like distant glass catching a whisper of sun. I stumbled back, my heel catching the edge of the stones. The bucket rolled, hitting the rim with a dull thud before tipping inside. I never heard it land. The rope jerked again. Hard, a sharp pull that snapped the end from my hand. The hum rose, low and constant, vibrating through the stones, through the ground, into my chest. It felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. I backed away slowly, watching the rope. It hung still now, perfectly still. The fog curled tighter around the well's mouth, twisting downward like smoke drawn into a throat. Then the hum stopped, and in the silence that followed I heard it, a whisper, not from below. From behind, right at my ear, I turned, but there was no one. Only the fog, only the barn, sagging in the distance, its roof lost in white. When I looked back, the well was quiet again. The rope lay limp. The fog had risen just enough to cover the opening completely, like it was hiding it. I stepped backward until I felt the dry grass beneath my boots. The air behind the barn was colder now, and for a moment I thought I heard water moving somewhere below. Faint ripples, soft splashes. But when I leaned closer, it wasn't water at all. It was breathing. Slow, deep, patient. Like something at the bottom was waiting for the next sound I made. I turned and walked back toward the cabin. The fog didn't move. The silence followed, and behind me, somewhere in the mist, a single drop fell again, echoing forever. Night returned without sound. The fog thinned, but the quiet stayed. Even the insects had stopped. The cabin window had shattered sometime after midnight. I found it in pieces, scattered across the floorboards, cold under my bare feet. Each shard caught the moonlight differently. Silver. Still. Sharp enough to hold reflections that didn't belong to me. I crouched beside them. The air smelled like dust and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The light trembled against the floorboards as if the glass itself was breathing. I picked up one of the pieces. Smooth edge, clean break. But the reflection wasn't mine. It moved slower. Head tilted at an angle I didn't make. Its eyes followed mine, though my hand stayed still. When I blinked, it didn't. I dropped the shard. It landed with a soft chime, rolling until it stopped against another. The fragments touched, and for a moment, I swore I saw movement between them. Shadows weaving across the cracks like something trapped beneath the surface. The wind pressed faintly against the cabin walls. Boards creaked, sighing under invisible weight. I stood, stepping carefully, every crunch of glass sounding too loud in the silence. The moonlight pooled through the window frame, spilling pale lines across the floor. Each shard caught it, reflected it, sent it back into the corners of the room. And in each reflection, something waited. Not faces, not shapes, just impressions. Like people moving behind frosted glass. Slow, searching movements. Hands brushing against the inside of the mirror's skin. I turned away, but the light moved differently behind me. Like the room had shifted when I wasn't looking. The reflection on the far wall twitched. It should have been mine, but the shadow raised its arm after I did. Late, offbeat, wrong. A whisper brushed my ear, soft, barely a voice. Just one word. Stay. I froze. The air was too still, the sound too close. I stared at the shards again, heart steady but slow, like it didn't want to beat too fast here. Something pulsed faintly in the reflections. A shimmer, a breath. Then put a face, not whole, just a pale blur leaning forward from the moonlight itself. Its eyes, wide and unfamiliar, watched me through broken pieces. And when I moved to stand, it tilted its head the other way. I could hear faint rustling outside the cabin, branches brushing, maybe, but it felt timed. Matched to the flicker of moonlight against the shards. Almost rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, I whispered. Who are you? No answer. Only silence thick enough to feel. Then one of the shards, the largest, slid an inch toward me. No wind, no movement. Just a faint scrape, like a fingernail dragged along the wood. I stepped back, and the reflection followed. A second behind. Its mouth opened, slow, deliberate, but no sound came out. The moonlight grew colder. The floor looked slick with it, a silver sheen that pulsed gently with each breath I took. My own reflection was gone now. Only the others remained. I knelt again, unable to stop looking. The broken pieces framed something that didn't exist in this room. A hallway, long and dark, with walls that breathed in time with the shadows. At the far end of that hallway, something turned. I saw its shoulder, its neck, and then nothing. The air in the cabin thickened. I could feel moisture collecting on my skin. The glass fogged over just slightly, like the reflection was exhaling. I wanted to leave. But my hand reached out on its own, hovering above the largest shard. I could see my fingers trembling in the light. And then its fingers reached back. The reflection touched where my hand hovered. A perfect mirror, but it wasn't cold. The warmth seeped through the surface, faint, alive, I pulled back quickly, knocking several shards across the floor. They scattered, clinking, sliding under furniture. The reflections broke apart, faces fragmenting into pale lines and dim shapes, until only one small piece near the window still glowed. I picked it up again. For a moment, it was just glass, plain, empty. But then I saw the moonlight shift again, and behind me, in the reflection, someone stood at the door, still, watching, motionless. I turned. The door was open a crack. Only fog outside. When I looked back down, the shard was dark, the reflection gone. Only my own eyes stared back, wide, uncertain, pale under the moonlight. I placed the shard on the windowsill, careful not to look too long. The wind finally moved again, brushing softly through the open frame. It carried the faint scent of rain, or maybe dust from the barn. The glass no longer gleamed. The moon hid behind a cloud, and for a moment I thought I saw those faint shapes shift one last time, disappearing as quietly as they'd come. I lay down near the wall, eyes open to the ceiling. The darkness above didn't move. But every time I blinked, I saw those pale faces again, caught forever in broken glass, and I couldn't tell if they were gone, or if they were still watching from the inside. It was colder tonight. The trees leaned closer than I remembered, their branches tangled above me like ribs, the forest breathing in slow, uneven sighs. I carried a lantern, though the light barely reached the ground. The fog wound between the trunks, low and restless. Somewhere behind me, something dripped, steady, patient. That's when I heard it. My name soft, almost gentle, like someone I knew whispering through cupped hands. I froze. The wind stopped moving. The forest went still in that strange way. When even silence feels aware of itself, I whispered back, though I didn't mean to. Hello? No answer, just a faint hum under the trees. Then again my name. Clearer this time, closer. It sounded like me, or maybe like how I used to sound. I turned toward the noise, lantern shaking slightly. The fog thickened, folding over the path like slow smoke. My breath came out in short clouds that vanished too quickly. The whisper circled me. Always behind, never near. Each time I stopped, it stopped too. But the echo lingered, just a few seconds longer than it should have. Like something mimicking the space between breaths, I started walking faster. The ground was soft, wet beneath the leaves. Every step felt heavier than the last. Somewhere to my left, a branch cracked, clean and sharp. But no one appeared. I said my own name out loud then, just to hear it from myself. The forest swallowed it whole, and then it gave it back, whispered, drawn out, wrong. It came from deeper inside the trees, pulling me with it. The lantern's light flickered as if resisting the direction I turned. The voice repeated, lower now, sad maybe, or tired. There was something familiar in the sound, something that made my chest tighten, the way an old photograph might. It wasn't calling me to danger. It was calling me home. The thought made no sense, but I followed anyway. The path narrowed, branches brushing against my shoulders. Pine needles clung to my sleeves. The air smelled of earth and old rain. Then the trees opened into a small clearing. The fog here was different, heavier, almost luminous. I could barely see the other side. Hello? My voice came back at me, twisted around the fog. A second later, it whispered my name again, only this time it came from right in front of me. I lifted the lantern. Light pushed through the mist, bending, swirling. Something moved just beyond it, slow, human-shaped, but not whole. Who are you? I asked. The shape tilted its head, and when it spoke, I heard my own voice answer. I'm right here. My hand trembled. The flame inside the lantern bent sideways, though no wind touched it. The figure took a step forward. The fog clung to its outline, hiding the details, except the eyes. They caught the light for just a second, and I saw myself looking back. Not a reflection, not quite. It was me, but older, tired, paler. It smiled softly, and then the whisper again, right beside my ear this time. Come back. The flames snapped. Darkness swallowed the clearing. I stumbled backward, feeling for trees that weren't there. The echo of my name bounced around me, once, twice, a dozen times, until it was everywhere, layered and soft, like wind trapped in 1,000 bottles. I ran. Branches scraped my arms, tearing small lines into my skin. The forest moved differently now, paths bending where they shouldn't. Every direction felt the same, every echo closer. I called out again, "Stop!" and the woods obeyed. The silence that followed was so deep it hurt to breathe. I stood still for a long time. Only the faint crackle of the lantern's dying wick filled the air. Then, faintly, one last whisper. My name. Far away. Sad this time. Fading. When I reached the edge of the clearing again, the fog began to lift. Moonlight returned in pale strands through the branches. The forest looked normal, small, harmless, asleep. But I knew it wasn't. Because as I turned to leave, I saw it again. A figure. Me, standing where I'd just been. Still, half in the fog, half in the light. Watching. The echo of my name slipped through the distance one last time. Soft. Final. And then it was gone. I walked back toward the cabin. The fog followed only part way. The forest exhaled behind me, slow and hollow. When I reached the porch, I set the lantern down and looked back once more. The trees were quiet. But in that silence, I could still hear it, faint, almost gone. My name, drifting through the pines, calling itself home. The first snow fell quietly. No wind, no birds, just the soft hiss of flakes touching the frozen ground. By morning, everything was covered. The ranch, the trees, even the fence posts, half buried and silent. It was the kind of stillness that makes you whisper without meaning to. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the pale crust. The air bit my skin, sharp and clean. Breath turned to mist. The world looked empty, wiped clean of sound and motion. Then I saw them. Footprints. Fresh. Too fresh. They led from the barn toward the forest. Deep impressions in the snow, spaced evenly, as if someone had walked through only moments before. But there were no others. No prints leading back. I stood for a long time, staring, trying to decide if they were human. They weren't. Not exactly. The shape was close, but longer. The heel dragged just enough to smear the edge. Each step pressed deeper than my own, as if whoever made them carried something heavy, or wasn't quite walking. I followed. Slow. Careful. The air was colder past the barn, heavy with the smell of frost and old hay. The snow here hadn't melted at all. Each crunch under my feet echoed like a whisper against the fog. As I moved closer to the tree line, I noticed something strange. The prints changed direction, weaving slightly, like the walker had looked back often. They grew farther apart, too, each step stretching longer, wider. Not running, just covering distance. A low groan came from somewhere ahead. Wood, maybe, bending in the cold. I paused, listened. The sound faded, replaced by the faint hush of falling snow. The prints continued into the forest. The trees there were skeletal, black ribs against white ground. The footprints threaded between them, leading into the thicker dark. I hesitated at the edge. Behind me, the ranch looked small, smudged by fog. Ahead, everything was pale and endless. I took one more step forward. The air changed. Colder still, but not in the usual way. It felt hollow, like the world around me was exhaling. The footprints curved to the right, following a narrow slope toward the creek. At the bottom, the snow was broken. The prints stopped at the edge of the ice. No sign of where they went next. Just a thin layer of frost across the frozen surface, untouched. I knelt beside it. The ice was clear, almost mirror-like. For a second, I saw my reflection looking back, small, blurred by my breath. Then another shape beside it, tall, still, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. Only fog hovered above the water. I should have gone back, but something about the missing return prints, that single path forward, kept me there. Snow began to fall harder, soft flakes melting against my face. The forest dimmed, the light thinning into pale gray. I followed. The ice upstream for a while, tracing where the prints might have gone. Each turn of the creek looked the same trees, the same shadows, until I saw them again. New prints, farther ahead. They didn't begin from the creek. They began in it, as if something had stepped out of the frozen water and kept walking. I stopped breathing for a moment. The world around me didn't move. The snow fell without sound. The prints led uphill this time, back toward the ranch, mine beside them now, two paths winding through the gray. Halfway back, the trail split. One set continued straight. The other circled. Around me. I turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the snow. The second path looped close, disappearing into the fog only to reappear again. Tighter each time. Closing in. My chest felt tight, my breath too loud. I couldn't tell which were mine anymore. Every mark blurred at the edges, melting into one another. Then, a sound, soft, like something stepping just behind me. I turned. No one. Only snow shifting slightly where I'd stood seconds ago. I started walking faster, didn't look down, didn't look back. The cabin's outline appeared through the fog, a smudge of dark wood and smoke-gray sky. But as I got closer, something else became clear. More footprints, dozens, leading to the door. All fresh, all stopping right at the threshold. The snow there was packed, sunken deep. Whatever had walked here had stood waiting for a long time. I reached the steps, my breath trembling. The handle was cold enough to burn my palm. I turned it slowly, opened the door, and stepped inside. Warm air brushed my face. The fire was still alive in the hearth, everything untouched. I closed the door behind me, locked it, listened. The wind outside had stopped again. Only the faint creak of old wood answered. When I looked out the window, the snow reflected the faintest light from the moon. The footprints glowed silver, 100 paths leading toward the cabin, but none away. The snow kept falling, soft, silent, covering the prints one by one until only mine remained, and even those were starting to disappear. The night had gone still again. Even the fog seemed tired, barely moving across the fields. The barn loomed ahead, its roof swallowed by the dark. I'd seen it from the cabin window. A faint light, pulsing, soft like someone walking with a lantern behind the boards. It shouldn't have been there. No one else lived within miles. I stepped outside. The cold hit first, damp, metallic, the kind that sinks into bone before you realize it's there. Snow crunched under my boots, but the sound felt small, eaten by the air. The barn's outline grew sharper as I moved closer. Wood groaned gently in the wind, the smell of earth and old hay hanging heavy around it. Then there it was again, that flicker. A flash of pale light near the back wall, gone before I could blink. I stopped, waited, watched the darkness breathe. Another flicker. Lower this time, close to the ground, like someone kneeling behind the boards, moving with a quiet rhythm. My breath fogged the air in front of me. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the slow creak of wood shifting in the cold. The light came again. 2 short pulses, then stillness. It wasn't fire. Too steady, too clean. I circled the barn slowly, my hand brushing the frozen boards. Each step stirred a faint rustle from the straw inside. When I reached the far side, I saw it clearly for the first time. A glow, soft and colorless, spilling from a small crack between the planks. It shimmered faintly, like breath caught in glass. I leaned closer. Through the gap, I saw movement. Not clear, just shifting shapes like something pacing. The light bent with it, swelling, dimming, swelling again. The smell changed then. Faint smoke, wet earth, metal. Something old, something alive. I pushed the door open slowly. It resisted, the hinges grinding with a low sigh. The light inside flickered once more, then vanished completely. Darkness swallowed everything. I waited for my eyes to adjust. Only the outline of the stalls appeared, empty, quiet. Dust hung thick in the air, catching faint hints of moonlight through the cracks. The silence was wrong, too full, like it was waiting for me to speak. I took a step forward, then another. Something brushed past my shoulder, cold, light, fast. I turned sharply. Nothing. The air behind me shifted, a faint rustling, then a slow, dragging scrape circling the edges of the room. I raised the lantern, though it barely held a flame. For a heartbeat, I saw it. A pale shimmer in the corner near the floor. Then gone. The smell of smoke thickened, and I realized it wasn't coming from outside. The boards beneath my feet felt warm, faintly pulsing, like a slow heartbeat. The flame in my lantern wavered once, stretched sideways, then snapped out. I stood there in the dark, completely still. A sound began behind me, soft, steady tapping against wood, like fingertips. Slow. Measured. Right where the light had first appeared. I turned toward it. The tapping stopped. The silence closed around me again, heavy and complete. Then a whisper, just above the edge of hearing. A single breath drawn through the cracks, close enough to feel on my neck. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The air felt colder now, seeping into my sleeves, curling down my spine. When I finally stepped back, the boards behind me groaned in reply. And then the light came again. Not from inside this time, but outside, through the far window. It blinked once, twice, and disappeared behind the barn. I ran to the window, but the yard was empty. Only fog, only quiet. I stepped out into the night again. The field stretched flat, colorless under the moon. No footprints, no glow, but the fog ahead pulsed faintly, a rhythm too soft to be light, too quiet to be sound. It followed the shape of something moving slowly along the tree line. I watched until the fog thickened again, swallowing it whole. The barn behind me creaked once more as if exhaling. I looked back. The boards were dark again, still, unbroken. Only one thing remained, a faint smell of smoke on my clothes. And when I looked down, I saw a small mark near the door frame, a perfect circle. Burned into the wood, still warm. It started sometime after midnight. A voice, faint, far away, threading through the static hum of the night. I'd been sitting near the small stove, half awake, the last ember fading into black. Outside, the wind had quieted completely. The whole cabin seemed to float in stillness. Then came that sound, soft at first, like someone speaking through water, a tone, a rhythm, not words yet, just movement inside sound. But it carried intention, something human. I thought it might be the radio. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but maybe the signal caught something distant. I turned it on, static, nothing else. The voice didn't come from there. It came from the window. I turned toward it slowly. The fog outside pressed against the glass like pale fabric, and the reflection of my lantern flickered faintly across it. Then faintly, unmistakably, the sound again, a voice. Closer this time, still muffled as though the speaker stood behind layers of air. I leaned forward, trying to catch it. A low whisper, stretched thin. A rhythm between the syllables that sounded almost like counting. 1. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. The numbers were soft, deliberate but broken, carried on a breath that wasn't quite right. Too steady. Too measured, I whispered. Hello? The fog didn't move. The voice didn't stop. It kept counting. 4, 5, 6. Then silence. I waited. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, thick with quiet like the space before a storm. I stepped closer to the window. My reflection merged with the gray behind the glass, blurring into it. And then I heard it again, closer, but not from outside. It came from the door, a faint murmur pressed against the wood from the other side, like someone whispering directly into it. I stood perfectly still, the air trembling faintly in my ears. The whisper turned into a word. A single one? I couldn't make it out at first, just the sound of my name folded inside it, not said clearly. Not said wrong, just remembered. I backed away, slow, quiet. The whisper followed, keeping its distance, always the same tone, the same almost voice. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Every piece of the room seemed to tighten, the air itself holding its breath. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe more. Then, a knock, barely audible, from the door. Not the sharp sound of knuckles. A soft thud, like something touching the wood without wanting to make noise. Another knock, softer, slower. I reached for the handle. My fingers brushed the cold metal and froze. Because on the other side, something breathed back, not loud, not even full. Just the sound of air, steady, deliberate. In, out. The voice spoke again. This time, clear enough to understand. Open, just one word. Flat, colorless, and impossibly calm. My heart hit my ribs so hard it made me dizzy. I stepped back, shaking, the old floorboards complaining under my weight. The breathing continued for a few seconds more, then stopped completely. I waited, holding my breath until my pulse stopped hammering in my throat. Then I leaned toward the door again, just close enough to listen. Silence. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. A trick of wind, sound bending in the cold. But then I saw it. A mark on the inside of the wood, not scratched or drawn. Pressed. A faint outline of a hand. 5 long fingers reaching inward from the grain, as if the wood itself had softened for a second and let something through. The edges of the print shimmered faintly in the lamplight. Wet or glistening, I couldn't tell which. And from the center of that mark, a single drop of condensation ran down, slow and deliberate, before stopping halfway. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Just that faint, stretched quiet. Then from somewhere far behind the house, faint, almost buried in the fog, came a reply. The same voice, distant now, repeating the same slow count, 1, 2, 3, then gone. I opened the door finally, but the yard was still. No footprints, no movement, only fog, curling low and thin, retreating toward the trees. I closed the door and sat near the stove again, staring at the faint mark in the wood. It had already started to fade. By dawn, it was gone completely. But when the wind picked up that morning, I could swear, in the spaces between the gusts, I heard the faintest trace of breath counting along, 1, 2, 3, and every time I stopped to listen, it stopped too. The fog thinned by morning, but the air still felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the world was holding something in its lungs. I walked toward the creek that cut through the back of the ranch. The water there was shallow, barely a whisper over the stones. But it had always been clear, a silver ribbon that caught the sky. Today it looked darker, like glass tinted with smoke. The trees leaned over the banks, their reflections tangled in the current. For a moment I saw my own shape between them, distorted, shifting with the ripples. Then it blinked, just once. Slow, deliberate, I froze. The reflection hadn't been me. I crouched by the edge, knees sinking into the damp earth, trying to find the same angle again. But the surface of the creek was calm now. Too calm. No wind, no movement, just my own reflection staring back, eyes wide, breath slow. I leaned closer. The air above the water felt colder than it should have. The smell of wet earth rose around me, metallic, faintly sweet like rain on rust. Then, The reflection smiled. I didn't. The lips in the water curled upward. Too smooth, too slow, as if pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled back, heart tightening in my chest. The reflection stayed where it was, still smiling, its head tilted slightly, and the movement sent small ripples across the surface, making it seem alive, breathing through the current. I whispered, "What are you?" It didn't answer. It only tilted its head again, mirroring the sound of the creek, the soft trickle, the low hum of flowing water. Then the ripples began to spread on their own, circling outward from where its face had been. I watched as the smile faded, the mouth stretching downward, the eyes widening until they became two dark pools. The reflection leaned closer, but I hadn't moved. The image in the water. It was approaching me. The shadows around the banks shifted slightly, as if pulled toward that center point. I wanted to run, but something in the air pressed me still. It felt like the moment before thunder, the whole world waiting to exhale. Then, a soft plop. A single drop fell into the water beside my hand. I looked up. No rain. Just fog. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. Only my own face now. But it looked pale, drained, eyes too wide, mouth half open, as though it had been caught mid-breath. I backed away slowly, the mud clutching at my boots with each step. When I turned to leave, I heard something moving in the creek. Not water, not fish, a drag, wet, heavy. I stopped, but the sound didn't. It followed the curve of the creek, matching my steps. Each time I paused, it paused too. Each time I moved, it started again, just below the surface, just out of sight. By the time I reached the wooden fence near the ranch's edge, the sound had faded, swallowed by the distance. I waited, listening. The wind came back slowly, and the trees began to sway again, their reflections dancing across the creek like ghosts. When I turned one last time, the water was smooth, still, but for a moment, just a flicker in the corner of my eye, I saw another shape standing beside my reflection. It leaned down, head tilted, its face shimmering just beneath the surface, and then it raised a hand, the fingers long, thin, almost touching the underside of the water, and moved in perfect time with mine. When I lifted my hand away, it stayed there, waiting, watching. The creek rippled once, and the reflection broke apart like smoke. By the time the sun reached the tree line, the fog had lifted completely. But later that night, when I poured water into the tin basin inside the cabin, I saw it again, just for a second, a pale smile forming beneath the surface, grinning up through the stillness. And this time, when I blinked, it didn't disappear. It whispered something through the water, so faint, so small, that I almost didn't hear it. But I know it said my name. The nights had grown longer, the fog thicker. It felt as if the air itself had begun to hum. Inside the cabin, everything was still, except the old radio on the shelf. It hadn't worked in months. But that night, it came alive. A low hiss crept through the silence, thin at first, like wind dragging over gravel. I sat up, watching the faint red glow of its dial pulse on and off. It wasn't plugged in. The static deepened, filling the room with a faint vibration, like breath caught in wires. I turned the knob slowly. No stations, no music, just layers of noise folding over each other. Then, between the cracks of static, a voice, soft, distorted, almost human. It whispered a single word, then vanished. I leaned closer, the hiss prickling my ears. Another fragment broke through. "Don't!" Then silence. The radio clicked, its light dimming to a pulse, steady as a heartbeat. The voice returned, clearer this time. Each word cut through the noise like a breath forced through water. "Don't look back." I froze. The static swallowed the voice again, replacing it with a deep, throbbing hum. It felt alive. as if something was speaking from inside the radio, not through it. I turned the knob off. The hum didn't stop, it grew louder. Vibrations crawled up through the floorboards, making the lantern tremble slightly on the table. The voice slipped through the static once more, this time slower, drawn out. Don't. Look, back! My hands were shaking now. I could hear my own pulse beating in my ears, matching the rhythm of that voice. And then behind me, something shifted, a soft scuff like a boot dragging across wood. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The voice on the radio stopped completely. Only the static remained, a low hiss that seemed to fill every inch of space around me. Then, another sound. Behind me, closer this time, slow, deliberate footsteps. Each one heavier than the last. The air turned colder. My breath fogging faintly in the dark. I wanted to turn, to see what was there. But the words from the radio pressed inside my head. Don't look back. I gripped the edge of the table. The footsteps circled slowly, to my left, then behind, then right beside me. The floor groaned softly under invisible weight. The static shifted again, now rising and falling, almost like it was breathing. Then, faintly under the noise, a whisper, not from the radio, from just behind my ear. Why aren't you listening? My throat locked. The hair on my arms lifted. The whisper brushed against my skin, warm and close, then drifted away. The radio snapped off. Everything went silent. The air hung thick, too heavy for sound to live in. For a moment, nothing. Then a single tone, high and sharp, cut through the quiet, long enough to make my teeth ache. It faded slowly, until all that remained was a faint ringing. When I finally turned around, the room was empty. No movement. No shadow, only the faint outline of something on the wall, a pattern in the dust, like fingers had been dragged downward, 5 long streaks, fresh, ending just behind the radio. I picked it up carefully. It was cold to the touch, almost wet. When I tilted it slightly, a faint hum returned, but not through the speaker. From inside the casing, a single phrase pulsed through the static again, clear this time. Don't look back. I dropped it. The voice stopped, but when it hit the floor, the radio dial spun on its own, settling on a frequency I hadn't turned to. A whisper came through, almost gentle, too late. Then, silence. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, watching the radio's red light fade to black. Outside, the fog shifted around the windows, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow standing just beyond the glass. Not moving, not waiting, just listening. And when the wind picked up again, it carried with it a faint, broken echo of that same voice. Soft, almost kind. Don't look back. I didn't. The nights were colder now. The fog clung to the cabin like a second skin, thick, wet, breathing against the windows. Inside, everything was still. Too still. I had grown used to silence out here, the kind that hums quietly under your skin. But that night, the silence felt occupied. I sat near the fire, its light soft, its warmth thin. The chair beside me was empty, or it should have been, but the cushion was sinking, just slightly, as if someone had just sat down. I told myself it was the heat, the old wood shifting, the floor giving way. But the pressure deepened. I could feel it now. The weight of something unseen settling next to me. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. The air around me thickened, and a faint rustle came from the other chair across the table, a blanket sliding, a soft creak. Then, stillness again. The fire snapped, a single ember drifting upward. In that tiny flicker of light, the shadows on the wall seemed to multiply. Too many. Too tall. One of them shifted slightly, not flickering like the others, but breathing. The air felt charged, the way it does before lightning touches ground. Then, a slow exhale beside my ear, warm, human, close. I turned, but there was nothing. Just the soft glow of the fire and the empty chair beside me. its cushion still indented. I whispered, "Who's there?" The whisper came back, faint and delayed, as if the air itself had learned my voice and was giving it back to me. "Who's there?" I stood slowly, every board beneath me groaning. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows bending slightly toward the center. Something brushed against my sleeve. Not air, not fabric. Fingers. I flinched back, heart hammering, but nothing moved. The blanket on the far chair shifted again, folding itself slightly, as though someone had crossed their legs beneath it. And then, a sound that didn't belong. Breathing. Shallow, steady, in the rhythm of something sleeping. It was coming from the empty space between the two chairs. I stepped backward, my heel catching the edge of the rug. The floor moaned under my weight. The breathing stopped. For a long moment I stood there, waiting, listening. Then came a sound like fabric sliding over wood. The blanket on the chair tightened, tugged by invisible hands. The chair legs creaked slightly, pressing against the floor, and then it turned. Just a few inches, angled toward me. My skin prickled. I could hear my own pulse beating in my ears. The air near the chair shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from a body that wasn't there. And in the center of it, the faintest impression of breath, not seen, but felt. I took another step back. The fire hissed softly, the flame lowering itself as if shrinking away from something unseen. Then, a voice, soft, close. So close it felt like it came from inside my own chest. "Stay." Just one word. Not threatening, almost pleading. The chair creaked again. The blanket slipped to the floor. Something cold brushed the back of my neck, like a sigh frozen in midair. I turned toward the window, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the reflection. A faint human outline, sitting perfectly still beside me. Its head was turned toward mine, its face lost in shadow. Then the reflection blinked, and the fire went out. Darkness folded over the room. I could hear nothing but breathing, 2 sets now. Mine and the other. A slow scrape came from the table. The cup I'd left there slid a few inches, stopping at the edge. Then a handprint appeared in the thin layer of dust beside it. Not pressed, not sharp, just outlined as if the air itself had weight for one brief moment. I whispered again, "Who are you?" The answer came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself. Here, the cup fell. The sound shattered the stillness, echoing through the small room. The air shifted again, the warmth slowly returning, as if whatever had been there had moved away. By the time I lit the lantern, the chair was upright, the blanket neatly folded. The fire crackled softly, as though nothing had happened. But when I sat down again, the cushion beside me sank, just slightly, enough to remind me that I was not alone. The fog came early that morning, thicker than before, heavier. It clung to the fields like it had roots, refusing to move, refusing to breathe. By noon, it hadn't lifted. The air was cold and wet, each breath leaving a faint shimmer before my face. The sky was gone, just a wall of gray pressing down. Even the birds had stopped. No wing beats, no calls, only silence. It was the kind of quiet that made the world feel hollow. I stepped outside the cabin, boots sinking into the damp soil. The world looked smaller, as if the fog had eaten the horizon. The barn, only a few yards away, was a ghostly outline. Each step forward made it blur, then reappear, like it was breathing in and out of existence. Something about that felt wrong. Like the fog wasn't hiding the world, it was deciding what to show me. I stopped at the gate. The wooden slats were wet to the touch, the air humming faintly between them. No wind, no sound. I called out just to break the silence. My voice didn't echo. It just stopped, swallowed whole. The sound didn't go anywhere. It didn't fade. It was simply gone. I took another step forward. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, soft and uncertain, as though the soil had forgotten how to be solid. Shapes flickered in the fog, small at first, like distant trees, then taller, Closer, but every time I blinked, they changed. One moment a fence post, the next, something standing too still. My heart began to race. The air pressed colder against my face, and with every breath, the fog seemed to tighten. It wasn't moving with the wind anymore. It was moving with me. I turned back toward the cabin, but it was gone. No outline, no roof, just white. The world had folded in on itself. I whispered, "Hello?" And something answered, not with words, but with a sound, a soft, drawn-out hum, deep and steady, like breath inside a tunnel. It came from everywhere at once. Above, behind, below, I closed my eyes and listened. The hum pulsed through the air, slowly shifting in tone, almost like it was thinking. Then, footsteps not mine, soft, careful, circling. I turned my head, but the fog was alive with movement now. Shapes forming, dissolving, stretching long and thin before vanishing completely. A faint whisper followed the footsteps, just beneath the hum. Not words, but sounds that carried meaning all the same. I took a slow step back. The fog followed, another step, closer still. It didn't feel like air anymore. It felt aware. When I reached out, my hand disappeared up to the wrist, the moisture cold and almost solid. Something brushed past my fingertips. Light, quick, deliberate. I pulled back sharply. My fingers were wet, but not with water. A thin gray film clung to them, smelling faintly of smoke and iron. The hum deepened. The fog pulsed once, a slow heartbeat. Then everything went still. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else. Then out of that silence, a voice, soft, calm, very close. Stay. It wasn't angry. It wasn't kind. It was simply there. The fog thickened around me, wrapping my legs, my arms, until the world felt heavy again. I couldn't move. Somewhere ahead, a shape appeared, tall, motionless, edges blurred by light. It didn't walk. It didn't breathe. It just existed, cutting through the fog like a thought made real. The hum built again, low and steady, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. Then, the shape dissolved, scattering into strands of mist. The pressure around me loosened. The air finally shifted, and just like that, the fog began to retreat, slowly, carefully, as though satisfied with what it had done. The cabin came back into view, its outline soft and fragile in the returning light. I walked toward it, my body shaking with the effort. The moment I stepped inside, the hum stopped. Silence returned, but the fog outside didn't lift. It stayed there, pressed against the windows, refusing to go. Even hours later, as night fell again, it lingered, watching, and when I tried to sleep, I heard it breathing softly outside, as if it had learned how. It started with a rhythm, a gentle tap, slow, deliberate. At first, I thought it was the wind. The trees outside always moved in the night, branches scraping softly against the cabin walls. But this sound was different, measured, persistent. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I tried to ignore it. The fire had gone low, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. Each one moved like it had its own pulse. The tapping continued. Same pace, same direction, always near the front door. I glanced at the window. Fog pressed thick against the glass, muting everything beyond it. Tap, tap, tap. I whispered to myself, it's just a branch. But branches don't keep count. The rhythm shifted. A few quick knocks, then stillness, like something listening for a response. I stood up slowly, each step making the old boards groan beneath me. The air was cold enough that my breath left pale trails. When I reached the door, the tapping stopped. Silence. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe more. Then a single tap again, this time on the window to my right. I turned my head, and through the fogged glass, I could see the outline of a branch. Long, thin, unmoving, perfectly still. Yet the sound came again. Tap, tap. I pressed closer. The fog outside shifted, thick like breath on cold glass. The branch didn't move, but the tapping did. It came from inside the wall now, as though the wood itself remembered the rhythm and decided to keep it going. I took a step back. The sound followed, keeping perfect pace with my retreat. Tap, tap, tap. My chest tightened. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, to wait until morning. But curiosity pushed harder. I unlatched the door slowly. The hinge groaned softly, the fog rolling in like slow smoke. Outside, nothing. No movement. No wind. The tree nearest the cabin stood motionless, its branches frozen in the still air. No tapping. No sound at all. I stepped onto the porch, wood cold under my bare feet. The world was quiet, too quiet. Then I behind me, tap. I turned fast. The door was open, the shadow of the branch framed perfectly across it, still not moving. The sound came again, tap, this time from above. I looked up. The eaves of the roof were swallowed in fog, but I could make out faint movement. Something brushing along the edge, not a branch. Something longer, thinner. The sound came again, faster now, like impatient fingers drumming on wood. I stepped back inside and slammed the door shut. The echo rattled the windows. The tapping stopped. For a moment, only the creak of the cabin remained. Then, a new sound. A soft drag, like something being pulled slowly across the roof. I held my breath. The dragging reached the far end, paused, then reversed. Back and forth, slow, rhythmic. Each pass made the lamps flicker slightly, as if the air above me was vibrating. I whispered, "Go away." The dragging stopped immediately, then brought a single tap right above my head. The roof answered me. I didn't move, didn't speak. The silence pressed down, heavy and waiting. Then, just as suddenly, the tapping started again, this time faster, cascading from one side of the roof to the other, like dozens of fingers racing across the wood. My heart pounded. The lantern swayed. The shadows on the wall spun and stretched. Then, nothing. The quiet was sharp, empty. The kind that hums in your ears. I reached for the lantern, lifting it toward the ceiling. The light glowed warm against the boards, smooth, undisturbed. But near the corner, just above the bed, 5 small indentations marked the wood, perfectly spaced. Too deliberate to be natural, each one deep enough to catch a shadow inside it. And when I leaned closer, I heard it again. Faint, but clear. Tap. From inside the ceiling, I stepped back, slowly lowering the lantern. The marks seemed to deepen as though responding to the movement. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the cold fire, watching the roof until dawn. The tapping never stopped completely. It only grew softer, gentler, almost like a lullaby meant to keep me awake. The morning fog never really left that day. It lingered, heavy, cold, curling around the roof like breath that wouldn't fade. By evening, the air inside the cabin had turned stale. Smoke from the fire hung low, refusing to rise, trapped like it didn't want to leave either. I opened a window, just a crack, and the cold rushed in, biting, clean, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and ash. The fire crackled weakly. The light trembled across the walls. That's when I saw them. 2 pale circles, barely visible at first, glinting above the chimney mouth. Eyes, wide, still. They watched through the haze of smoke, unblinking, unmoving. For a long second, I thought I was seeing reflections, a trick of the firelight against soot and stone. But the pupils shifted. I froze, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The fire popped softly, breaking a piece of ember loose. And in that tiny burst of light, the eyes vanished. Only darkness remained. I waited, listening to the faint hum of the wind outside. The cabin groaned, settling under its own weight. Then a soft scrape echoed from the flue, like something long and thin dragging against the bricks inside. I backed away from the hearth, each step slow, deliberate. The smoke curled outward, gray tendrils reaching toward me. I whispered to myself. There's nothing there. But the scraping grew louder. Closer. I stared at the chimney. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a flicker. A pale glint between the soot-black stones. The eyes were back. Lower this time, watching from just above the fireplace rim. My throat went dry. The fire dimmed, as if something was pulling the heat out of the air. The shadows deepened around the edges of the room. The corners began to blur. The eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, just hovered there, patient. I took one more step back and the floor creaked. The eyes flinched, then gone again. Swallowed by the dark, the next sound came from above. A faint scuff right over the roofline. Whatever it was, it had climbed out. I moved to the window, pushing the foggy glass open just enough to see the chimney top. The moonlight fell faintly through the mist, turning everything a pale gray blue. The roof was still. The fog shimmered faintly against the shingles. I waited. Nothing. Then, movement. A shifting shape behind the smoke, tall and narrow. The fog bent around it, like it didn't want to touch. And there, at the very edge of the chimney, those same two eyes, wide, pale, reflecting the moonlight like glass. They leaned forward slightly, catching the faintest gleam from below. Almost curious, almost human, I whispered. Who's there? The fog rippled. The shape dissolved, but the eyes stayed. And then, they blinked, slow, deliberate, in perfect silence. The window pane shivered in my hand, as if something had brushed against the glass from outside. I shut it quickly, the latch clinking faintly. Inside, the air felt heavier, like the fog had followed me in. The fire flickered again, and this time, the light revealed small handprints etched faintly in the soot along the chimney stones. Too small to be mine, too high to have reached, each one smeared downward as though something had climbed out. The tapping from last night, I remembered it then. The way it moved, the way it listened. I sat down, staring at the chimney. The room was quiet. The only sound and the faint pop of dying embers, then a whisper. Soft, breathless. From inside the flue, still here. My blood turned to ice. I didn't answer, didn't move. The whisper faded. Then, a faint drip. Something wet falling down the inside of the chimney, hitting the ashes below. The smell that followed was sharp, metallic, unmistakable. The eyes didn't return, but their absence felt louder than the fire ever did. When I finally looked up again, the fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows, hiding the world beyond and somewhere behind it. I thought I saw them again, just two pale lights floating above the chimney top, waiting. The sun never rose properly that morning. It hovered behind the fog, a dull white disk, cold, without warmth, without promise. Inside the cabin, my shadow stretched long across the floor, longer than it should have been. It reached toward the door, fingers of darkness spilling into the cracks between the boards. I moved slightly. It didn't. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The lantern, maybe, or the weak dawn filtering through the mist. But when I stepped left, the shadow lingered, still facing forward, still reaching. The air felt heavy, like the moment before thunder, but without sound. Even the wind outside had gone quiet. I knelt down, watching how the shape curved across the floorboards. It was mine, mostly. Head, shoulders, arms, but thinner, elongated, almost patient, I whispered. What are you? The words came out soft, swallowed instantly by the quiet. The shadow's head tilted, just slightly. Not with me. Against me. A chill ran up my arms. I stood slowly, watching as the shadow followed, but with a lag, half a heartbeat late, like it was remembering how to mimic. The lantern flickered. The edges of the shadow rippled, and in that tremor it smiled. Not wide, not human, just a subtle curve beneath where its face should have been. I stumbled back. My heel caught the edge of the rug. The lantern clattered against the wall, light bending, stretching my shadow farther. It filled the cabin. Across the walls, the ceiling, the door. My own outline became the room's skin. Every move I made came half a second too late in the reflection, and then slowly it stopped following altogether. The air thinned. Each breath turned shallow, like something was taking half of it from me. I backed toward the window. Fog clung to the glass, leaving pale fingerprints where I touched it. The shadow didn't move. It only watched, if you can call that watching. The smile faded. Its head tilted again, this time lower, closer to the floor. And then it began to crawl, limbs bending wrong, stretching farther than mine ever could. Each motion soundless, smooth, like liquid darkness slipping between the cracks. It reached the far wall, and then it didn't stop. It began to climb. Across the boards, the outline scaled upward, folding itself along the wood until its head reached the ceiling. And there, it straightened, now taller than the room itself, its body bending where mine could not. I whispered again, but I don't remember what I said. My voice sounded small, like someone else's voice trying to escape my throat. The lantern dimmed to a faint glow. The only light came from the window, and the shadow's shape swayed within it, as though breathing. I reached for the door. The knob was cold, metal biting into my palm, and just before I turned it, a movement caught my eye, my reflection in the window. Standing still. But the shadow beside it moved. It raised its arms slowly, pressing its hand against the glass from the other side. The fog rippled around the shape, like a veil reacting to touch. My own reflection didn't move at all. I stepped back. The arm on the glass followed, pressed harder, leaving no mark. Then it lowered, turning away, melting back into the dimness. I ran to the lantern, turning the knob until the flame steadied. Light spilled through the room again, and my shadow snapped back into place at my feet. Normal. Still. I exhaled. Slowly, carefully. For a few minutes, nothing happened. No motion, no sound, until I noticed the window again. The fog outside had cleared just enough for me to see my reflection in full. And behind me, against the far wall, another shape, my shape. But taller, thinner. Head bent low enough that it brushed the ceiling. I turned fast, and the wall was empty. Only my own shadow stared back, but it was smiling again. And even when I blew out the lantern, and darkness filled the room, I could still feel it standing behind me, just close enough for our shadows to touch. Morning came slowly. Or maybe it didn't come at all. The light outside was pale, drained of warmth, muted by fog that refused to lift. For a moment, I thought it was still night. The clock on the wall had stopped again. The hands frozen somewhere between 3 and 4. The fire had gone out hours ago. Ash covered the hearth like gray snow. I sat in the same chair where I'd watched the shadow last night. My breath still fogged in the air. The silence, thicker now, as if the world had forgotten how to make noise. When I finally stood, the floor creaked beneath my feet, echoing through the emptiness. It felt like the sound didn't belong to me anymore. The cabin door was still ajar, a thin line of fog curling through the crack. I pushed it open. Outside, the ground was damp. Pale frost clung to the grass. The fog hung low over the fields, moving in soft waves as though breathing. No wind, no birds, not even the usual rustle of trees. Just quiet, endless, watchful quiet. Then footprints leading away from the porch. Fresh, pressed deep into the earth. Too long, too spaced apart to be mine. They went straight toward the tree line, disappearing into the fog. I looked behind me, expecting to see my own tracks, a path back to the cabin door. There were none, only the single trail leading away. Like something had left, but nothing had returned. I followed them, slowly at first, then faster, until the mist swallowed everything around me. The prints stayed steady, each step deep, deliberate, as though whoever made them was walking with purpose. But there was something else. between each footprint, a faint drag mark. Like something being pulled just out of sight. The air grew colder. The fog thickened. My fingers numbed, but I kept walking. And then, just as suddenly as they'd begun, the footprints stopped, right in the middle of the clearing. No turn, no break, just an end. The ground beyond was untouched, smooth, wet, undisturbed. I stood there, watching the fog shift in slow circles. Something about the silence felt wrong. Not empty, expectant, I whispered. Where did you go? The fog stirred slightly, almost like it wanted to answer. I stepped closer, and the ground beneath my foot sank. Not mud, not water, something softer, hollow. I knelt down, brushing the frost away. The soil moved easily, too loose for this cold morning. Beneath it, a faint outline. The curve of a hand. My hand pressed deep into the earth. I stumbled back, heart thudding against my ribs. The prints behind me were gone, swallowed by the fog. When I turned toward the cabin, I couldn't see it anymore. Only white, endless, and still. The sound that followed was faint, a soft hum, low and distant, like a voice carried on wind that no longer existed. It came from everywhere, and nowhere. I ran my fingers through the air, half expecting it to part like water. But it stayed thick, clinging to my skin, leaving behind a chill that didn't fade. Then, out of the corner of my eye, movement. Something shifting between the trees. Tall, narrow, pale enough to blend with the mist. It moved the way fog does, without direction, without effort, and then it stopped. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze. I stood perfectly still, every muscle in my body heavy with cold. The fog around it trembled, a ripple spreading outward. And then it took a step back, into the trees. Gone, the hum faded. The silence returned, heavier than before. I turned again, searching for the cabin, for anything, and then I saw it, through the fog, faint and distant, the roof, the chimney. Still standing exactly as I'd left it, I walked toward it, slowly, carefully. Each step felt longer than it should, each breath shallower. When I reached the porch, I stopped. The door was closed, completely. I hadn't closed it. The window beside it was cracked open just enough for me to see the inside. The chair still by the fire, the cold lantern on the table, and a shape sitting where I had been. Same posture, same stillness. Only darker. It didn't move, didn't look up. But as I watched, I saw my own breath fogging the window. From the inside, I took a step back. Then another. The fog curled around my legs like water. The air thickened. I whispered, "Am I still here?" The shape in the chair moved slightly. Its head turned, slowly, toward the door. And in that moment, I realized the footprints hadn't led away from the cabin. They'd been leading back to where I was still sitting, watching myself from the window, waiting,